Quick question. If you had the power to make one manga or anime world real, which one would you choose? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. This epic journey begins by introducing us to Molmont Carl, a mercenary and chatty alpha. He goes on to question the rest of the group, inquiring if any of them knew their current whereabouts. The first one to respond was a thieving-looking bastard called Lyle. He shared that he was a humble carpenter from Adola. As for why he was there and where they were, he had no idea either. Next up was Greta, a chubby virgin shop owner from Halcia, and like Lyle, he was also clueless about their situation. Then Jenna took the stage. She confessed that she was a primal baddie living in the forest, and just like she liked it, she'd tell them the raw truth. She had no idea what was going on. Last was Islat Han, or Poppy Han as we'll be calling him from now on. He shared that he was a simple farmer, and just like them, he also had no clue what was going on or where that ominous place was. One of the nameless extras chimed in at that moment, suggesting that they might have been captured by an evil mage, probably to be used as experimental subjects or sex slaves. But Molmont refuted the idea, saying hell no to the first scenario. As for the second guess, that would depend on the mage. If she was a baddie, then why not? Lyle also chimed in, pointing out a commonality between all of them. They were all from Townia. If they kept on talking, then there was a huge chance they'd gather better information. As they were still discussing, a fairy Loli suddenly appeared amongst them. She excitedly told them that their master had opened a crack in space-time, so they should go ahead and get their asses ready for battle. Obviously, the group had no idea what she was talking about. They all gave her the "who is this tiny bitch" look, completely ignoring her earlier words. Realizing she was getting ahead of herself, the fairy Loli introduced herself as Izel, the manager of that place. Upon her reply, Molmont stepped forward, asking if she was responsible for bringing them there. Isel replied that it was none of his business, and unlike the sex slave mage he was expecting, she wasn't fucking around. This comment enraged Molmont, who immediately drew his sword. If Isel didn't want to talk, then he'd just have to force her. Isel sighed at his foolishness before warning him to back down. If he didn't, then he might as well die. Molmont ignored her warning, fully unleashing his aura. He was already fed up with that place. Not only had they been kidnapped, but the blissful life of a sex slave was also mercilessly denied. How could he not be enraged? He vowed to teach Isel a lesson. A man's dreams shouldn't be ignored, after all. Before he could stand up for the down bad chads, the poor fool got yeeted, his decapitated head hitting the ground soon after. Amidst the crowd's shock and horror, a system notification sounded, announcing that Molmont, 2-star, had returned to the goddess's embrace, and his fighting spirit would be remembered for eternity. The system also announced his cause of death: suicide due to stress. Damn. Now that she had their attention, Isel revealed her true colors. She warned the rest not to fuck with her, lest they end up like Molmont. With that out of the way, the savage fairy officially began her managing duties. She told the group the instructions were clear: be obedient, fight well, and win. If they did that, they'd be safe. As she was giving her small pep talk, the system notification sounded again, announcing that a new party had been formed. Immediately after, Lyle, Ranto, Marlin, Kelcard, and Jackson were all added to the party. Isel got overjoyed by this, even giving us a slight thigh tease. She giddily told the party to get ready before opening a giant door, the so-called crack in space-time. She then called out the members of the first party, instructing them to head through the door. Before they could, however, Han stepped up, speaking for the group. He asked for some weapons, because how else were 1-star like them supposed to fight? If she truly wanted them to climb the tower, then that much was necessary, especially since she'd already killed a precious 2-star. Jenna eyed Han from the sidelines, completely confused. She had no idea what he was saying, but from Isel's reaction, his words seemed to have an effect. Isel thought about it as she eyed the dead Molmont. Turns out Han's words were true. Molmont was indeed a 2-star. We also get a bit of extra information about the character panel, which specifies the player's name, star rank, level, class, and other attributes, including skills. After mulling it over for a bit, Isel wrote a reminder to the master, asking him to equip the heroes with weapons. She also shared a tip, informing him that once weapons were added to the weapon storage, the heroes could be easily armed. Following this advice, the master spent 50,000 gold to summon 10 weapons. The weapons were of different varieties and grades, ranging from E+ iron swords to D+ morning stars. Seeing as he had more information than they did, the members of the first party approached Han, asking him for more intel. But Han rejected them, saying he didn't have a lot of information either. He'd just arrived there after all. However, if there was one thing he was sure of, it was that they'd definitely die if they didn't take things seriously. He then advised the group to arm themselves in the weapon storage unless they wanted to be caught lacking in the upcoming battle. The crowd instantly descended into chaos at his words. Though they still had no idea what was going on, they all scrambled to arm themselves. Soon, they were before the gate once again, and it was evidently clear that these bastards were cooked. No matter what was on the other side of the gate, there was no way in hell these fuckers were surviving it. Isel obviously didn't care about that as she yelled at them to get moving. Left with no choice, the first party reluctantly tested the gate before walking in. Over at Han, the Chad was currently selecting his weapons. He first chose a low-grade wooden shield before shifting his focus to the stalking Jenna. The baddie immediately capitalized on the attention, rapid-firing a bunch of questions at our boy. Han coldly told her not to yap too much. All she had to do was go into the arena, kill, and survive. The rest would take care of itself later. Just as he was about to drop more chatty wisdom on her, the system notification sounded, announcing that Marlin had returned to the goddess's embrace. This was immediately followed by 4 more notifications, announcing that Kelcard, Ranto, Jackson, and finally Lyle had all returned to the bosom of the goddess. The whole of Party 1 had officially been annihilated. The clueless Jenna shifted her questioning gaze at Han, but the Chad ignored her, instead diving into his thoughts, probably having some manly ideas. As for Isel, the micro-loli was cursing Party 1 to high heaven. How could they be so useless as to die on the first floor? What kind of trashiness was that? Soon, the system sounded again, drawing everyone from their worlds. It announced that a new party had been formed, and Han, Jenna, Dajil, Greta, and Kale were all part of it. Isel, who was still fuming, rushed the party to get a move on. They didn't have all day after all. At that moment, some old geezer, whose name I honestly couldn't be bothered to remember, spoke up, claiming that his arthritis was acting up and that he couldn't join the party on the raid. Jenna immediately called bullshit. He was walking just fine a second ago. The crafty geezer didn't even flinch. He doubled down, saying it was a recent development and that he definitely wasn't making it up. Han ignored their banter and silently made his way to the gate. The rest of the party had no choice but to follow, though it was obvious they really didn't want to. Even the crafty geezer got dragged along, his arthritis be damned. As they walked through the gate, they found themselves in an odd temple. Most of the space was shrouded in darkness, apart from one middle door, which gave off a gentle blue light. To the right and left of this main door were other doors, but they were inactive for now. As for the main door, it had a soft, glowing hue with the words, "Main Dungeon," written boldly on it. Above that was some ominous text, instructing the heroes to climb the tower and save the world. Just as they were taking in the bizarre sight, the system sounded again, warning that the gate was opening. Han, who was at the forefront, yelled at them to lock in. Shit was finally about to get real. The moment his words dropped, light burst out from the middle door, completely enveloping them. When the light receded, they found themselves in a vast field, the golden glow of dusk slowly bathing the landscape. Contrary to the beautiful scenery, the fates of our Chads didn't seem all that pretty, because right in front of them stood a horde of goblins, all looking hella hungry for blood. The system soon announced the task. The mission was to annihilate all enemies. Han immediately took charge, instructing the others to get into formation. He warned them that fighting was the only way to survive, so they'd better lock in. Unfortunately, his pep talk amounted to absolute shit, because these bastards instantly fled. They ran so fast, you'd think a bouncy mommy was waiting for them on the other side. Even the old geezer took off. His alleged arthritis magically healed. Because of their cowardice, the system hit them with a fear debuff. Their stats instantly dropped by 30%. Worse still, the whole area was sealed off, meaning they couldn't escape even if they wanted to. When they realized they were trapped behind an invisible barrier, the trio grew frantic, begging to be let out. The old geezer also changed his excuse. Apparently, he now had to take a shit. I swear this dude will say anything to survive. Han eyed the trio before deeming them useless. There was no way such fools could help him survive. Jenna called out to him, asking if they'd survive if they killed the goblins. Han smiled at her determined face. Seemed the baddie wasn't useless after all. He assured her that they'd be fine so long as they fought their way out. Then, his eyes flicked to her bow. Did she even know how to use that thing? Jenna scoffed. She replied that she was a primal baddie. Of course she knew how to use it. Besides, her father was a hunter, so it'd be a joke if she couldn't wield a bow. To that, Han simply replied, "Bet." He'd handle the vanguard, while she took his rear. Pause. She'd cover him from the rear. Realizing the plan only involved them, Jenna glanced at the cowards in the back. What about them? Han didn't even hesitate. He told her to ignore them. They were straight trash. Having them wouldn't make a difference. And so, the duo braced for battle, standing fearless against the charging horde. As the goblins closed in, our boy Han took a brief moment of reflection. In truth, this was the first time he was ever holding a sword and a shield. And the goblins before him weren't just random monsters. They were otherworldly creatures so terrifying that deep down, he felt like shitting his pants. That was because his real name wasn't Islat Han. His real name was Han Seojin. And as you might have guessed, he wasn't from this world. He had been transmigrated into a game. And not just any game. A shitty one. He had no idea why or how he got there. All he knew was one thing. He was fucked. And this is the story of how he tries to unfuck himself. To fully understand our boy's predicament, let's flash back a little bit to his time on Earth. There was a game called Pick Me Up. It was a widely popular mobile game by the studio Mobius. The goal of the game was to get to the 100th floor of the tower. During the process, you'd nurture and raise your heroes using strategy, tactics, and logic to clear the tower. Obviously, our boy was an avid fan of the game, and until yesterday, he was a normal, virgin loser who mostly played the game to hide from the fact that he had no bitches. During one such gaming sesh, the game promoted a special event in celebration of reaching 1 million downloads. And as expected from such promotions, several perks were listed, which enticed our boy. Especially the last reward. The opening of the Transcendental Advent Dungeon. This perk was important to Han because, like you down bad chads, his luck was terrible. Not only was he a maidenless, untouched loser at 30+ years old, but he also couldn't pull a 7-star hero to save his life. In Pick Me Up, the heroes ranged from 1 star to 7 stars, and our boy couldn't pull anything above 5 stars despite sinking hella cash to pay for gacha pulls. Thus, when the event dropped, he had no choice but to participate in it. Contrary to other games, Pick Me Up had hella hardcore rules. For the heroes, death was final. It didn't matter whether they were 1 star or 6 star, whether you got the hero for free or you sponsored their growth by selling ass on the low. If they died, they died. You couldn't get them back. That's why strategy was very important in the game. In dangerous and uncertain situations, it was necessary to send in a sort of suicide squad to scout things out before sending in your main party to mop things up. And, well, it was during such sessions that things started to fall apart for Han. Several warning prompts suddenly flashed on the screen, warning him that his 38th party was scared. Everyone, from the Captain Diora to the barbarian Melky, felt intense fear, making their stats automatically drop by 30%. Diora even suggested retreating, and coming from a 6-star, things were definitely not right. But Han didn't care. This was ultimately a game, after all. Although he didn't understand why they felt fear, he didn't mind it because all he needed was for the suicide squad to scout out the enemy's attack patterns. If they died in the process, then so be it. So, as the bastard he was, and with his anime doll pillow waiting for his sweet loving, he instructed the party to move on. Predictably, the whole party got clapped. When faced with a level 999 boss, they didn't even put up much of a resistance. The fight was over as soon as it started, and all Han saw was a new prompt informing him that he'd lost. As he eyed the obviously suspicious boss character, he instantly realized it was a system error because how else could a character have such absurd levels in the game? Not to mention the weird-ass name, which screamed, "I'm a bug." Though it was a shame to lose his suicide squad, Han quickly forgot about it and instead focused his attention on the weird boss. When he did, things suddenly turned spooky as the boss faced him before flashing a toothy smile. Even before he could react, a hoarse voice suddenly rang in his ears, saying that it had found him. Following the voice was an ominous flash of crimson light before everything went dark. When he finally came to, his whole vision was still dark apart from the mysterious system prompt floating before him. On the prompt was a string of letters urging him to create an account. The prompt then changed to one asking for a player name before the words "any Teng" were typed in. At this point, Han finally realized he wasn't controlling the prompts. Rather, he was just a bystander watching it all happen passively. And whoever was controlling it was even more of a careless loser than he was. For example, his player name was basically the short form of anything, which meant he didn't put any effort into the task at all. But despite his grievances, he was still mercilessly swept along, following the process whether he liked it or not. Soon, the system welcomed the new player anything to the game before ushering him to the tutorial. It was during this tutorial that our boy Han finally gained control of his body again. Following this change was confusion as he found himself in a ruined and burning town. In the background, the system continued to give more prompts, introducing that this was the Heim province of the Taunia region. In this blissful ground, unknown enemies suddenly attacked, laying ruin to the land. As the master, it was up to the player to climb the tower and save this world. During this journey, several heroes would join him, and currently, though lacking, he already had one such hero on his team, the Chad, Han Seojin, or, in other words, our transmigrated virgin loser, Han Seojin. Speaking of the Chad, he officially got his first mission of the game. Tutorial quest: take down the goblins that invaded the town. And as expected, he wanted nothing to do with that shit. What goblins? All he wanted was to return to his beloved sex doll. How could he have the mind to fight a goblin right now? Unfortunately, it wasn't up to him to decide because the goblin charged at him, forcing him to block. Mulling over his situation, he instantly locked in, knocking the goblin's weapon from its hands. Capitalizing on this result, he immediately comboed with a vertical slash, putting an end to the pesky fucker. When everything was said and done, he found himself in a new region, and that's when he knew he was fucked. Before him was a familiar view, and it didn't take him long to realize what had just happened. He was inside the game Pick Me Up. Fuck. As he was still freaking out, the system prompts kept flashing by, urging the master to summon more heroes before the next stage. And as if he'd listened to them, a brilliant summoning light suddenly burst out. Within it was the super rare 4-star hero, Shay. When this foxy baddie materialized, Han got an idea of how he'd come to that world. He was also summoned. However, compared to the mommy Shay Lathastri, his attributes were pure trash. The baddie was a 4-star hero, class, knight, with absurd physical attributes. On top of that, she had 3 skills: combat logic, intermediate swordsmanship, and knight's determination, all at level 1. Compared to his barren character profile, the two were truly leagues apart. Speaking of the duo, Shay approached Han before introducing herself as a knight. And as expected from a maidenless, untouched virgin, our boy stumbled hard, stuttering the hell out of his name. When he finally introduced himself as Han Seojin, the events had already progressed, and their master, Anything, had already added them to a party. With the newly formed squad, the duo was immediately sent to the dungeons, where Shay obviously shined. In contrast, Han was pure garbage, and even saving his life was a huge problem. For every monster he tamed, Shay took on 4, showing the immense difference in their stats. A 3-star difference became painfully clear to Han during those moments. However, that was just the start of his misfortune. As a final step of the tutorial, the master was introduced to the synthesis process in the game. This was, without a doubt, the worst news for our boy. Just as he was hesitating, a harsh voice called out, telling him to move. This marked the first meeting with the fairy Loli, Isel. Han, who'd played the game for ages, instantly recognized the fairy and called out to her. Isel, however, was taken aback by that. She hadn't expected the Chad to know her name. She decided to overlook that fact for now and look at his character profile. However, what she saw inside made her even more puzzled. The person in front of her bore 0 resemblance to the Han Islat mentioned in the log. The Han in the book was from Taunia, a chatty poppy who'd been pulling bitches ever since he could walk. In contrast, the Han in front of her was a down-bad Chad, probably the same kind of weirdo who bought Belle Delphine's bathwater. In any case, shit was definitely not right, and something was evidently going on. Han took that opportunity to explain himself, saying he was from Seoul and demanding to be sent back. When Ezel realized he was from Earth, she freaked the hell out, puzzled as to what was happening. Regardless, she told Han to head to the synthesis chamber first. They'd discuss the rest later. To that, Han obviously said, "Fuck that." How could he be stupid enough to walk into a room where he'd most likely die? Who did she think he was? But again, it wasn't up to him, and he soon found himself tossed into the synthesis chamber. To fully understand why he was freaking out, it's important to know that synthesis was a sort of death sentence to trash characters like him. The process involved enhancing one hero by sacrificing another. In a sense, one hero consumed the other to get a power boost. For our boy, this was a problem because the other party was a noble, milfy, 4-star baddie, while he was a trash 1-star. No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible to sacrifice Shay and save Han. So, with that in mind, he grit his teeth and closed his eyes, waiting for his inevitable death. However, to his surprise, he realized that he was fine. And the one to be synthesized was Shay instead. The whole thing didn't make sense to him, and he spent quite some time before the reality sunk in. In contrast, the noble Shay was easy about it, only sighing helplessly at not being chosen. Before she disappeared, she flashed Han a killer smile, leaving everything in his hands. Although he was confused at first, he continued to push forward, and that brings us back to the present. Unfortunately, the flashback was hella mean to our boy Grit, because he got clapped the second time returned to normal. Luckily for him, his death earned him a ticket to the goddess's embrace, so it wasn't that bad. On the other parts of the battlefield, Han and Jenna continued to fight while the cowardly duo ran, especially the crafty old geezer. Who'd have thought he'd survive this long? Back to our boy, he silently blocked an incoming goblin attack before diving back into his monologue. He thought back to the synthesis process, noting that it was a drag-and-drop feature. So unless anything made a mistake, it was highly likely that the dude was playing the game without thinking things through. No matter the case, he was lucky. Shay died, and that just further emphasized how shit this game was. Locking back in, he asked Jenna about the remaining enemies. She replied that she'd already killed one, but the cowardly duo had been killed in the process. Han shouted at her to forget about them. They were useless to begin with. Just as he was about to regroup with Jenna, a goblin suddenly ambushed him from the back, landing a nasty blow on him. Feeling immense anger well up inside him, Han countered with a shield bash, yeeting the absolute shit out of the goblin. He had no idea how or who had summoned him there, but one thing was certain. Before he got summoned, a level 999 boss looked at him and laughed. His summoning definitely had something to do with that fucker. Well, no matter who or what they were, they'd messed with the wrong person. He said this while finishing off the last of the goblins, bathing in its blood. After things calmed down, we finally saw the state of the battlefield, and it was terrifying. Han had even lost an arm in the process. Jenna showed worry over this, but Han told her it was fine. He'd be okay when he returned. Instead, his focus shifted to the mechanics of pick-me-up. There was almost no player control over the combat in the game, since the heroes automatically did most of the fighting. And although that might be off-putting to some people, the game still had 1 million downloads all over the world. The reason for that was simple. The player could observe the world like a god. Even as he suffered, Han knew anything was observing him from above, probably having fun with it. Well, even if he was, and even if the game was shit with hellish difficulty, he told the Chad not to quit. He wanted him to watch. Watch as he survived until the end and beat this trash game. And that's when we finally learned our boy's true identity. Not only was he a pillow-loving freak, but also the 5th-ranked pick-me-up player of all time. Codename, Loki, the Master of Masters. In other words, he was him, and his story was just beginning. After the first hellish dungeon raid, we get a mini time skip. In that time, the homie Han had been doing his best to adjust to his new reality. He knew more than anyone how fucked up the world of pick-me-up was. Not only was it a merciless hell, but also insanely brutal to slackers who couldn't accept reality and kept whining like a bitch. These conditions were true for the strong but mostly so for the weak. And our boy Han had been summoned as the lowest of the low, a pathetic loser and pitiful 1-star hero. In the world of pick-me-up, he might as well not exist, as 1-star wasn't even qualified to be cannon fodder. Their future and fates amounted to just one word: death. They were bound to die, the only difference being in how they died. They could either die in battle or die by being synthesized. That was about it. Of course, Han wasn't willing to accept such a fate. How could he die in an isekai when his sweet but maidenless life was waiting for him back on Earth? Like hell, he'd let that happen. He'd do his level best to survive, even if his stats were pure garbage. Thus, the Chad was out in the training field running laps like his life depended on it. Because it did. As he ran, he reflected on all the facets of strength he needed to pursue. Not only did he need physical strength, but also mental strength. Because surviving in pick-me-up without strong mental fortitude was pure lunacy. It couldn't be done. Luckily for him, he was used to being mentally strong. Growing up as an orphan had honed him, and all he needed to do was channel that strength. As he was busting his ass on the training ground, the maiden Jenna approached him with a curious look. She asked what he was doing and why he was going so hard at it. Han replied that it was obvious. He was training to kill monsters. Jenna mulled over his words for a bit before picking up a bow and arrow. She confessed that she'd been thinking about the whole thing lately, and no matter how she thought about it, it was unlikely that they'd escape from that place. Since that was the case, she might as well make herself useful and not be a burden. Saying so, she let the arrow fly, landing a direct headshot on the training dummy. She then confessed that her father was a hunter, so archery was a hobby of hers. If she used it well, then she might just be of some assistance to him. Han thought about it before asking if the dungeon raid was her first real-life battle. Jenna replied that of course it was. She might not look it, but she was a primal princess not too long ago. She mostly stayed at home. When could she possibly have had the time to fight goblins? Han accepted her answer before asking about her bow skills. How confident was she in them? Jenna nonchalantly replied that they were decent, nothing to write home about, but enough for her to survive on. Han silently nodded, but his attention was on something else. Although the baddie had downplayed her skills, he could still see her immense potential from her character profile. Jenna had a unique skill, something that even he didn't have. Not only that, she'd managed to fight through the fear and kill a goblin even though it was her first time fighting. Sure, she was rusty, but the fact that she did it, and even had the mental fortitude not to collapse afterwards, made her a diamond in the rough. If he supported her well, then she had the potential to be a great squad mate, or maybe waifu, depending on how things played out in the future. Thinking to this point, Han offered his hand to Jenna as a form of collaboration. Jenna gladly shook the hand, even flashing a beaming smile. She expressed her goodwill towards him and said she anticipated working with him. And judging by the system notifications, she meant that shit. The system then announced that an intimacy bonus could be created by the members of a party. The bonus would essentially buff their stats, so if used well, it could actually be pretty OP. With that done, Han called out to the micro baddie, Isel. Isel answered the call but started complaining immediately after. She asked what Han bastard wanted. Didn't he know she was busy? Han told her to cool it with the drama. She was most likely looking at some sussy videos on the hub. And besides, if she was really that busy, then why did she pop up immediately after? Isel replied that he should forget about that, and since she was already there, she emphasized that she wouldn't tell him shit. If he was curious about pick-me-up, then he should climb the tower and find out. All the answers were at the top of the tower. Han replied that he knew that already. Instead, his question was about her status bar. Was he the only one who could see it? Isel first kept quiet before putting on the worst cover performance I've ever seen. She insisted that she had no idea what Han was talking about, but even a fool could tell this bitch was lying. Han eyed the fairy before coming to a realization. This feature might be exclusive to just him. For some reason, he seemed to have the ability to view game messages and the Master's forged messages. If he was correct, then this might be his gold finger, or cheat. Putting that aside for now, he asked Isel what would happen if the Master quit the game. Isel dodged the question, but told them to pray that he didn't. From her tone, it was obvious nothing good would happen. Han then thought about it before asking if the time in game was the same as on Earth. Isel freaked out and refused to answer, but that in itself was the same as an answer. Han thanked her for the intel and teasingly told her to keep it up. Isel freaked out even more, swinging her hair like a deranged psycho. If only she could kill this annoying one-star bastard, how awesome would that be? But Han wasn't worried about that. From his understanding, he knew the fairies couldn't act on their own. They could only punish the players if the Master's orders were rejected or in self-defense. Without meeting either criterion, they couldn't harm the players. This was just a bit of what he'd learned so far, and if he kept at it, He was sure he'd uncover all the secrets of the game and thus improve his chances of survival in this harsh world. Jenna then called out to him, asking what they were talking about. Although she'd heard everything, it still made no sense to her. Han enlightened the baddie by explaining the lore of the game to her. He informed her that Pick Me Up was essentially a tower trial. They were to climb all 100 stages of the tower while listening to the orders of the master. If they managed to complete all the missions given and cleared the 100th stage, then they would be free. Probably. Jenna asked if the missions involved monsters and killing. Han confirmed this, expounding that it was the reason he was currently training. To clear the missions, they'd need strength, and strength could only be achieved by training. Jenna accepted the answer but was still worried. How were they supposed to clear the missions on their own? Han explained that it wouldn't be just the two of them. The master would summon other people, and with them, more parties would be created. The game was set up in such a way that their lives were ultimately in the master's hands. But of course, that wasn't absolute. They still had a bit of control over how their lives turned out, and that was determined by their actions. After their chat, the duo completed their daily training, and during the process, Han discovered some rather interesting things about the world. Daily necessities and food were refilled every day, and if you desired something, all you had to do was think about it, and it would appear in your drawer or closet. Of course, the desire had to be reasonable, so things like guns and a gawk machine couldn't be allowed. But that aside, the most important secret he discovered was the difference in their training output. Players who worked hard and grinded were always stronger than lazy bums who just idled around. Sure, training didn't necessarily increase their stats or levels, but it did refine their skills and improve their proficiency. And players with greater proficiency were always stronger than players without, even at the same level in stats. On that same note, the players would soon be categorized into 3 distinct groups. The first was mentality, whether they were prone to panicking or not. The second was skill. How skilled were they, really? High-ranking players were summoned with their skills already learned, but low-ranking players were essentially diamonds in the rough. The master had to look to filter out the gems. The last was physical capability, which was self-explanatory, and also what our boy was working on right now with his killer abs on full display. We cut to 3 days later when the master finally logged back into the game. During that time, Han had been grinding and finally got himself some unique skills: low-rank swordsmanship and low-rank shield techniques. His stats had also increased by a lot, with his strength, stamina, intelligence, and dexterity standing at 15. He gazed at his panel, feeling particularly proud of himself. Done with that, he told Jenna to get ready. Shit was about to get active. Jenna heard the reminder and followed after him. Han then explained that a party normally had 5 members, and since 2 were already present, the master would probably summon 3 more to fill the difference. True to his words, the master summoned 3 players, or heroes, to complete the party. They were Aaron, Toby, and Yelsons, all at level 1. As expected, the trio were confused, but Jenna told them to gear up first. They'd explain everything afterward. She then joined Han in collecting the gear, all whilst Izel opened the gate to the dungeon. Predictably, the newbies didn't listen to her. Instead, they foolishly confronted Izel, demanding to be sent back. Jenna tried to warn them, but Han told her to let them be. They'd learn the truth soon anyways. Jenna sighed, but ultimately let them be. She asked Han if they'd be all right. Han replied that they'd be fine, although a few bruises were inevitable. We cut to the trio beaten senselessly, with one actually doing the Taemin pose, bent over for some backshots. Isel warned them to be obedient next time, otherwise she'd really rock their shit. Done with that, she flashed the party a beaming smile, wishing them a great experience in the dungeon. Of course, whether they died or not was not important to her. She just hoped they'd put up a fun experience. Over at the party, they officially spawned in the dungeon. The system quickly highlighted the details of the mission. It was a conquest similar to the first floor. They were to annihilate all enemies and hopefully make it out alive. Before them was a horde of goblins and a pack of wolves, obviously the subject of annihilation. And similar to the first floor, the newbies instantly got scared, suffering a 30% debuff from the system. Surprisingly, Jenna also suffered the same debuff, confusing Han a bit. However, he soon realized the reason and slapped her in the ass. Nothing like a bit of sexual harassment to clear the system of fear. Jenna screamed in surprise before barking at him. He'd nearly scared her to death. Han told her to relax, He'd handle the wolves, so she should kill the goblins. Jenna said bet, as her fear debuff faded. It seemed her fear was only temporary, probably due to her nervousness. The newbie players, however, were complete trash. Han had no hopes for them at all. In fact, it would be a miracle if they even managed to survive this. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time to waste on the fools since the enemy was already attacking. He braced himself for impact, preparing for the lunge of the wolves. When the first one got to him, Han switched from defense to offense. He stabbed at it, landing a direct hit through its maw. When that didn't end it, he switched his grip, slicing the wolf in half. Through the sputtering blood, Han welcomed his first kill on the second floor. Obviously, things were just getting started. He immediately turned around, blocking a sneak attack from the second wolf. Han locked in before slashing at the insidious fiend, but the bastard just jumped back, easily dodging the slash. However, Han didn't relent. He pressed the attack, decapitating the wolf soon after. As he watched the beast fall, he remembered Jenna and the two goblins she was facing. He worriedly called out to her, asking if she was okay. Fortunately, the baddie was her, and she managed to annihilate the enemy, though with some difficulty. Han stared in surprise at the beyond dead goblins. Even though they were his enemies, he couldn't help but feel sorry for them. Jenna had pierced the shit out of them. In fact, it was easier to count the number of arrows left in the quiver than those impaled in their bodies. The poor fools had been massacred, and the culprit for their demise still had her eyes set on them. Han approached as he calmed her down. He gently told her to relax. The bastards were dead already. Jenna heaved a sigh before relaxing. The experience had really left her on edge. Luckily, it was over now, and the system also confirmed the same. It then announced the mission rewards, with the party earning 5,000 gold and a bunch of crafting materials. With that done, the whole party was teleported back to the main lobby. When they arrived, the whole world shook, and the heroes immediately went frantic. Jenna in particular screamed as she asked Han what was going on. Han replied that they were going to the third floor. After completing the second floor, the whole lobby would automatically be leveled to the third floor. As for what that entailed, he didn't share with Jenna. He simply eyed the useless trio, thinking to himself that things were bad. After waiting for a while, the master logged off. Only then did he sigh in relief. Turns out the automatic level up to the third floor was a sort of trap by the game. If the master had gone ahead and challenged the floor, especially with how much dead weight they were currently carrying, then the party might have been annihilated. Luckily, the bastard still had some sense and didn't fall for it. As he was still thanking his lucky stars, the micro-baddie Izel spawned in with a killer yawn, complaining about how tiresome the ordeal was. Han immediately told her to cut the bullshit. She didn't do shit, so why was she tired? He then analyzed the master's game patterns, noting that he logged in once every day. If he calculated that based on the in-game time, then the master would log in once every 3 days, meaning he had 3 days to prepare for the next floor. Luckily, he'd leveled up quite a bit on the last floor, so his stats weren't too trashy. In fact, he could argue his efficiency in leveling up had improved, and he attributed that to his improved physique and hard work. When he walked out of the weaponry, he caught a glimpse of the newbies harassing Jenna. They shouted at her, demanding to know what was going on. Han stared at the fools before sighing. He sympathized with them, but did they truly not understand their current circumstances? Sure, 1-stars were mere commoners, probably fools who hadn't held a weapon in their lives, but could they not put 1 and 2 together and step up? Truly pathetic. He now understood why everyone called 1-stars disposable. On that note, 2-stars and above were really different. 2-stars were mostly mercenaries in that world, and although they had no idea what was going on, they were composed enough to wield their weapons and fight if need be. Above 3-stars, however, were different. Sure, they could also fight, but judging by how the Mommy Shay immediately jumped into battle, it seemed she already had an idea of what was going on and why she'd been summoned. They'd probably been filled in on the details, even if just a fraction of it. As he was still lost in thought, Jenna called out, complaining about the trash trio. She asked Han to help them out, deeming them an unreasonable bunch. Han rejected her instantly. He didn't see the need to help out such trash, especially since they didn't want to help themselves. Jenna agreed, but she still insisted on helping them. Wouldn't it be fine if they could be trained and turned into colleagues? Han, however, told her to forget about them. They would be dying soon anyway. If his guess was correct, then the trash trio would be gone sooner rather than later. While the two were still discussing, a third fool crashed the party, demanding to talk to Han. Han stared at him silently before turning to leave. He really had no time to waste on these bastards. The fool, however, didn't get the hint and rudely grabbed Han by the shirt. Han didn't waste time and immediately clocked him on the jaw. Who the hell did he think he was grabbing? He called the bastard out for being useless yet still demanding answers. Did he think he was a pushover or something? The fool realized he'd fucked up and immediately apologized, too scared to even get up. Han eyed him before walking away. He truly had more important things to do. We cut to the duo grinding in the training field. Well, I call it grinding, but they were mostly just swinging their swords and shooting arrows. Luckily, that was enough for the system to recognize as training, so their skill levels improved by quite a bit. And obviously, the useless trio were absent, probably determined to be useless until the end. In any case, Jenna and Han continued their training, even going as far as to use each other as training dummies. Jenna attacked while Han blocked. Although he managed to stop a couple of the arrows, he wasn't skilled enough to block all of them, so injuries were inevitable. Luckily, the lobby had a self-healing feature, so such wounds weren't a big deal. In fact, they were actually pretty useful since they could obtain skills on the cheap. Han grabbed his sword and instructed Jenna to continue. He didn't mind the pain. On the contrary, he treated it as proof of being alive. And if he was alive, then he'd continue to do his best until he escaped that hell. Just like that, the duo continued their training. During the process, Han awakened a basic sword shield technique, a result of his swordsmanship and shield skills fusing. And although we don't get to see Jenna's growth, I'm sure the primal baddie made her fair share of progress. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, and the master logged in again. Isel, always as enthusiastic as ever, shouted at the heroes to gather at the square. Han and Jenna readily complied, with the latter more psyched up than usual. After all that hardcore grinding, she was looking forward to clapping some enemy cheeks. The useless trio, however, continued with their rebellious nonsense. They shouted at Isel to let them go, arguing that they wanted nothing to do with that place. Isel got enraged and yeeted their foolish asses. She then pounced on them, beating the living shit out of them. After a session of whooping therapy, the foolish bastards finally quieted down, ready to comply with the rules. We cut to the party already in the dungeon. This time, the enemies were a bunch of armored goblins. However, different from last time, the duo had leveled up, so they easily mopped the floor with the goblin asses. Before the fiends could realize what was going on, the duo had completed their massacre, swiftly completing the mission. Jenna sighed at how simple it was, while Han deemed it quite boring. The only thing that ruined that epic moment was the presence of the useless trio in the back, still being as helpful as a wet dog on a rainy day. Jenna complained about them, but Han told her to forget it. She shouldn't get worked up by such trash. As he said that, the system issued a prompt reminding the master that he could rerun some of the already cleared floors. The master accepted the proposal, and thus the party was teleported to the first floor. Similar to the last time, the mission was to annihilate all the enemies. Jenna and Han easily made quick work of them, swiftly completing the mission. After the first rerun, the master ordered another one, causing Han to frown slightly. Although they still massacred the horde, he couldn't help but get a bad feeling. True to his prediction, the master proceeded to work them to the bone, not giving them enough time to rest. When they finished their unknown number of reruns, the master finally stopped, allowing them to return to the lobby. Han silently walked forward, but it was obvious his mind was drifting somewhere. Jenna, however, complained about the trio, blaming them for how hard things were on them. How long were they supposed to carry those fools? Han told her to relax. The solution for that was nigh. This was the world of pick-me-up. There was no way the master would keep tolerating a bunch of useless trash. When he said that, the door to the synthesis chamber suddenly creaked open, drawing everyone's attention. Under the trio's puzzlement, the system issued a new prompt, sealing their unfortunate demise. The time had finally come. The time to eliminate these worthless fools. Han eyed them but didn't feel any remorse. They'd been given enough chances. It wasn't his fault if they didn't seize them. In the cruel world of pick-me-up, you either adapt or you die. There was no other way around it.